Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for listening and welcome back to another episode of the Business Owners Freedom Formula Show, where we chat with inspiring entrepreneurs and dig into their highs, lows, and everything in between of their business building journey and learn about how they've been able to achieve ultimate freedom. In today's episode number 29, we have here with us Cort Dial. Cort Dial believes the only leader who needs to change is you. He has spent the last 30 years in a variety of environments ranging from corporate skyscrapers to South American jungles. Cort has owned a unique approach to developing coaches and business leaders founded in the core conviction, leaders reach the summit of leadership when they can create extraordinary business performance while caring for people. Cort calls the new breed 21st century hero the all-in leader. So that is Cort Dial. Welcome, Cort. Thank you so much for being here. How's it going today?
Very good. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much. What's going on in Austin, Texas?
What's going on in Austin? Well, it's Friday. It's sunny. It's hot.
Well, that's good.
Your typical day in Austin, about 100 degrees and hot and this time of year.
Very nice. So obviously you've been at doing what you're doing for 30 plus years now. And usually on the show, we kind of like to rewind and really dig into how you got started in the entrepreneurial world anyway. So if you can take us back to when that first light bulb went off, when you first jumped into the entrepreneurial world, that'd be awesome.
I worked in a chemical company, large company, for about 15 years. And about the last 7 years, I was pulled out and turned into what they called an internal consultant. I guess they saw a knack in me and my ability to coach others and things like that. And I had a good mentor. And I did that for several years. And my mentor sometimes said, Cort, you need to go out on your own. There's only going to be a limited amount of work you should do here. And I'd never even considered that. I assumed my generation assumed you were going to go to work for a company and you were going to work 40 years and retire. But the more I thought of it, I thought he's right. So I went out and decided to start my own practice and to do what I do with companies all over the place. I've been hired from anywhere from large corporations like Intel and Disney to other consulting companies to come in and help train their consultants, help develop their consultants, all kinds of things like that.
Very exciting. So how long have you been at that now? So once you went out on your own, how long have you been on your own?
Approaching 30 years.
Wow. Well, nice work done. Obviously, you've figured out a thing or two along the way. And obviously, our listeners are business leaders leading their own business, whether it's a small business, online business, local business, service-based business. And a lot of them that I have found over the years, a lot of business owners are all about the bottom line. And obviously in your introduction, you're all about leadership, all about helping people, caring for people. Why is it so important to care for those people? For example, your customers and your employees, the two, most, important groups of people in any business. Why is it so important to care for those people first before even thinking about the bottom line?
Well, I'm about the bottom line too. You'll notice if you read any of my stuff, my blogs or anything, or if you go to my website, it's all about performance. Why do you care for people? Well, because that's what society expects today. That's what people and employees expect today. I lived at a time where people expected to be treated very poorly by their employer. It was just part of the deal. That's not the expectation today. You cannot produce business results today at the expense of people or the planet. So you have to figure out a way to produce the same results that businesses have always had to produce without harming anyone. The second reason is that's the best way to get results. I'm a strong believer in producing results through people, not through systems or programs. And you'll hear me talk a lot when you work with me about our fields of performance. The first two fields are the fields which typically business owners look at. That's systems and behaviors. And in most organizations, they try to direct and control people's behavior to get performance through systems, some type of policy, procedure, program. The other two fields, which will always trump the previous two and are easier to work in the sense they require less money and physical things, is what I call the self field. That's what's going on inside of your employees. And then the social field, what's going on amongst your employees. Those two fields are really where performance is generated and created. And the social field is by far the most powerful. It will always trump the other three, with one exception. If an individual has a very strong sense of their self, if I'm very clear on who I am, what I stand for in this world, what I'm up to, what I do and what I don't do, I can resist the social field. But if I don't, and most people don't, the social field will determine my behavior, regardless of what your system or program asks me to do.
Very interesting. And I think that is, I think it really is, like you said, growing up, everybody tells you just work for one company for 40 years, regardless of how they treat you. And now I think, with the power of the internet and the word getting out and people know a lot more about what's going on, that if you're not, being treated well, or if your company doesn't have morals or ethics, you're not going to stick around long. Your people aren't going to stick around long, which, obviously hurts that bottom line, because you're always spending money and turning your wheels and never really building a strong team that sticks around. So with that said, one of the quotes that I kind of pulled out in your intro, you say that the only leader who needs to change is you. And what does that actually mean anyway? How can, a business leader out there really take that to heart and make some changes and impact their business?
If you ask me to come into your business and help you in some area of performance, one of the first things I would try to help you see is performance is a direct reflection of your leadership. Everything that happens in your organization is a reflection of your leadership. And I've seen it time after time. I'll say to these folks, you're the big wheel. You're the big wheel around here. And when the big wheel spins, the little wheels down at that chain of wheels, they spin big time. And people don't realize, especially most business owners, the emotional effect they have on their people. A good example of this, when I worked in that large chemical company, we were only allowed to wear black, brown, or navy suits to work. Very conservative those days. One day, the CEO comes walking into the credit union. I worked at the world headquarters campus, comes walking to the credit union in a tan suit. The next day, my boss and his boss were wearing tan suits. And that started to open my eyes to the effect a leader has on an organization. And so I've seen it over and over. If you change, everything else changes around you. You develop yourself into someone who can put forth a future in front of your people that they want to be part of, that they want to help create. If you can give them missions along the way to that future, if you can treat them with respect and dignity, if you can build their self-esteem, if you can do all the things that great leaders have done throughout history, and you can learn to do those things, you can produce performance that are well beyond what you actually believe is possible. And that's one of the things I've learned to do over this almost 30 years. How do leaders create performance, not that's just good or competitive, but is unprecedented, that is most people would think could never have happened.
Yeah, and I think, really, what you hit on there is, you're leading by example. The leaders are doing this, and a lot of them have nothing to do with the actual business itself and what you're producing. It's really building that culture and getting the people to follow the leader, because you are digging in and you're doing it, and you're not just that guy that sits in the office and collects checks and doesn't really care about the people. Which at one point, maybe that did work, but obviously now, with people really being into, like you said, that social aspect, I think one of the things I kind of took a note on is, a lot of times, in my experience, I've seen leaders, i.e. business owners, blame their employees and say, well, it's their job, and if they can't figure it out, that's their problem. And I think your big wheel analogy there is, you are the one driving the ship. And if they're failing, it's not because, they're bad people or they're employees. It really does, the buck stops with the leader. And I think that is really important for our listeners to take away, to understand. And I was just talking with Tim Sanders and Jeff McManus. They had kind of mentioned the same thing. You do a lot of things that aren't really related to the actual product or service your business providing. It's really building that team culture. So how do leaders, change, say, the culture in their organization and, lead by example without always worrying about, is this going to have a direct impact? Basically, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get more money right away, because I think that's that instant gratification that's tough, because it does take time to see that change. So what do you tell those leaders out there that need to have a little bit more patience and see what the results could be?
Well, a lot of people that I coach started businesses, started organizations, and they started them because they had a new idea, a new product, something like that. And they're the best at what they do in that company. So the first question I have them consider is, am I the right person to lead this company? Many of them aren't. It's called the founder's trap. You're the best at what you do here. Are you the best leader here? Are you really willing to give up all the stature you get by being the best at what we do, which is very emotional, valuable to people, and start over again and become a leader? And some say yes, and some say no. I'm going to go hire somebody to play that role. The smart ones usually do that. But if you want to learn what it takes to be a leader, what the leader basically does is put in front of people a vision of the future that people say, I want to be part of that. And if you're good at that, you don't have employees anymore. You have followers, and you're not running a business. You're leading a movement. All of the great businesses over the years people have felt like they're part of a movement. You think of Google, you think of Pixar, you think of Apple. When they were at their best and doing their best, people felt like I'm part of some significant movement going on here. And that's one of the there's 5 basic emotions that you have to serve as a leader. One of them is to play a big game and have people feel like what I'm doing is significant, it's worthwhile.
That's a great analogy. And, I usually work with service-based business owners who are exactly what you said. They started their business because they're really good at what they do, or they have a passion for what they do. So no matter what service they're providing, whether they're working on someone's home, working on someone's car, providing a personal service, whatever it is, they started that because they're either really good at it or they're passionate about it. And to become a leader, they have to be able to delegate that out, that service out, trust their team, give their team the tools to, to excel and to be a leader, which I think is really hard to do. So you mentioned they could either, figure out how to be a leader or hire the leader. And which way does it, in your experience, obviously you've been doing it for 30 years, which way does it usually tend to go?
The way it usually tends to go is they say, I want to be the leader, but they're unwilling to do what it takes to become a leader, and they're unwilling to give up what gives them significance in the organization, which is I'm the best at what we do. Often they make the mistake of not realizing it isn't your first or second product that makes your business. It's typically your third or fourth. That's a lesson that Pixar learned from Steve Jobs. They weren't intending on making these movies we watch all the time anymore, but he helped them see you're not going to survive based on your first or second product. It's those other products. But the founder usually is so invested emotionally in what he's or she's created and what he or she's really good at, they don't want to give it up.
That is true in my experience as well. So for everybody out there, if you aren't willing to give it up, you're not willing to be a leader. What usually happens with those businesses when they're so resistant to change and they're so invested in, kind of controlling everything?
They do your typical curve where they grow and grow and grow and they're doing great. And then their clients starts asking, well, what else do you got? What's next? And they don't have an answer for that. And that's when they usually tumble. And often the leader will either close down the business or sell it or something else.
That is definitely true. And it's, they have a gift and they want to control everything, but then short-sighted, they don't see the opportunity in what the outcome is going to be. If you try and do everything, at the end of the day, you just have a really stressful job. And then eventually you quit that job or, sell that job to somebody else for a lot less based on how much time and effort you've actually put into it. Yeah. So thank you for that insight there. I was on your website and there's one thing I couldn't help but notice, and I think it was in your introduction as well. It says you spent time in the South American jungles. What in the world was going on in the South American jungles?
I was doing work for a company called Rio Tinto. They're a mining company. And it was a number of mines down there. I was visiting and essentially helping them understand leadership, understand how to create performance. In this case, it was mostly around quality, environmental, safety performance. But I spent, several months on and off down there. It's a beautiful place. This was way out in the middle of the country. took about 6 hours and several buses and little boats to get you there. But it was worth the trip. I'd never seen as beautiful a country, and I'd never seen as much wildlife in my life.
Very cool. So with that being said, what is your kind of normal day these days with your consulting? Do you do a lot of traveling? Do you do a lot of on-site training, or is it more from the comforts of Austin, Texas?
More and more, it's from the comforts of Austin. I'm switching gears. I just ended a 6-year engagement with a large chemical company where I coach and executives and leaders. And to give you an example of helping someone do something they think is impossible, the last group I worked with drilled deep water wells out in the Gulf of Mexico. If you've seen the Horizon movie,
yep,
those type of wells. I've been on those types of wells. By the way, it's a very good movie and very accurate, I thought. But the leader in this organization decided, I'm going to put something in front of my people. As I like to say to leaders, we don't remember Dr. King because he said, I have a strategic plan. We remember him because he put something out in front of people that people said, I want to be part of that world. I want my kids to grow up that way. Well, he put in front of them a vision, and they very much, and it was basically, we're going to be seen and as respected as first responders. We provide a service to this nation. People don't get it. We're going to be seen that way. But the first step on that way was he put the possibility they could drill every well on budget, on time, the very first attempt, which is impossible to do. They've never done it. No one's ever done it. Well, through the type of work of becoming a leader and learning what it takes to create this type of performance, they went over 18 months drilling every well on budget, on time, the first time. It's one of the reasons they've survived the drop in oil prices recently. So that's the type of work I've done. I sit in their office, I sit in their meetings, I stay in their organization. I'm basically there, and I'm the person who walks up to them and says things like, how did you intend that to land? And they'll tell me, and I'll say, well, do you want to hear how it really landed? And do you want to understand why you didn't connect? And so I like to develop a leader in the moment. What I've switched gears to is holding summits in Austin where leaders and people that coach them come and spend a week with me in very small groups. And then essentially I train them in what I do, give them all the materials, teach them all the methodology, all the different insights and things like that.
Excellent. And obviously our show is called the Business Owner's Freedom Formula Show. So everybody's view of freedom and their, goal of achieving their freedom is different. So kind of what is your ideal view of freedom, and how do you make sure that you achieve that on a daily basis?
Well, I've been a long-time follower of a gentleman he's been dead for decades, but his name's Joseph Campbell. And he had a simple advice for your life. I read a book of his called An Open Life years ago, and it's basically follow your bliss. So I actually often do exercises with some of the folks I'm coaching, especially if I get very personal with them. And it's basically about describe like a movie script, write it down, your day or week in your life of bliss. Who would you be with? What would you be doing? Don't think about, I got to make a living. Don't think about any of that stuff. In my book, Heretics to Heroes, I have a chapter where my son-in-law and daughter came to me and asked me to do this exercise with them. They stopped being teachers and they started running their own business. They have a business here in Austin where they develop young men, baseball players. But that's the key to enjoying your work, is be very clear on what it is that is your bliss. And it can be very different for different people. I wanted to have the big home on the hill with a beautiful view and all that, and I got that. I know a lot of young people today are not interested in that at all. They want experiences, not a big home. They want to go places and be with people and experience things. But what is that is your bliss? And I highly recommend that book. I'll say the name again, An Open Life. It's a very short read, but it's basically, I think, a manual toward following your bliss.
Love it. And we'll definitely link that book up in our show notes over at paulmaskill.com. So you can definitely check that out there. Head on over to Amazon or get it wherever you like to get your books. Speaking of books, let's talk about that book that you just mentioned real quick. You got your book, Heretics to Heroes. What does that even mean, and who's it for, and what's it all about?
Well, if you look through history and even business, the greatest leaders have always begun as heretics. whether it's Galileo, King, or Jobs, people thought they were nuts. They were crazy. But what a heretic is a heretic can go to the future, spend some time there, and come back and tell us about it. They're like time travelers. Steve Jobs stood up and basically predicted the world we live in today. That's what a heretic does. They always start out that way. But many of them either are lost in obscurity, they don't know how to turn their heretical idea or thought in something meaningful. They don't know how to lead, so they stumble and fall. And many of them are sitting out there right now in organizations knowing the answers to their company's issues, but no one is looking for them. No one is looking. They tend to be at the edges. They don't tend to be at the center. These are the oddballs. I was one of them. The first time I got up in front of a huge group was over 600 people in that chemical company. I declared, this is early 90s, that it's not acceptable to produce results at the expense of people at the planet, which in those days was a radical idea. When I got done, someone stood up and yelled out, "He's a witch, burn him." And they all started laughing and clapping. That's a heretic. But there was a gentleman in the audience who saw me and asked me to join his group, mentored me, and I'll always be grateful for him. So my book is essentially about putting leaders and the people who coach them in the room and observing what great coaching, great leadership looks like. It's not a how-to book. It's a storytelling book. Many people have said it's a page turner. It reads like a novel, and that's the intent.
Nice. Well done with that book. And I think, for me, the key takeaway there is when you do have these ideas and you think people are going to think you're crazy, most people aren't confident or not, they're not confident enough to actually speak out and say, hey, this is what I think, or hey, this is what I think is going to happen, because they are going against the grain. And especially in this day and age, it's really tough to do that without being called crazy. So kudos to you for doing that in the early 90s, and then obviously realizing the importance of it. It came to fruition, and then all the people that you pointed out that have done that as well. Definitely, if you're confident and comfortable, it's okay to go against the grain and believe that.
Well, step one, I recently had in this oil company, I recently had a young engineer come to me say, I have a totally different way to do what we're doing. No one will listen to him. Even my boss is told, don't ever bring it up again. And the first conversation I had with him, Will, are you willing over this? Are you willing to go all in? If you're not, I don't want to coach you. Are you going to make this happen regardless of the circumstances? Even if you have to lead this company, people will be designing wells this way in the future. If you're into that game, I'm willing to work with you. Well, he came back to me and he convinced me he was. And today he's one of the major projects going on in this company because he learned what does a heretic do? And the first thing you got to do is go find a sponsor who has some power who can protect you. And he went and found that person, and that person's been his mentor ever since.
Awesome. Well, that is definitely exciting and, kind of inspirational story there. If you really do believe in what you're doing, and if everybody else thinks you're crazy, I know even just a simple quote from Warren Buffett says, if everyone's doing something, go and do the other thing, because people like to follow people and they follow trends, even if it's not the right thing, kind of like the housing market, stock market, all those things. When everyone's buying, you should possibly think about going the opposite way and betting on that. So with that, you're starting up your summits. What are the, other than that, what are the future plans for Cort Dial and everything that you've done and will be doing? I'm
writing a follow-up book to Heretics to Heroes. It's called The Heretic's Handbook, and it is more what I just described. You're a heretic. What's the process? If you're a leader, how do you produce results that are unprecedented? What's the whole method, steps? It's very much a how-to book, and it's based on the summits I do.
Excellent. And we'll definitely be looking forward to that one coming out. We will link everything up, like I said, in the show notes, so you can get your hands on the current book and link up with Cort on all the other things that he's doing and find out about when that next book comes out. But as you know, our show is all about freedom. It is the Business Owner's Freedom Formula show. So all good things do come to an end. We don't want to take up too much more of your time or our listeners' time. But before we sign off, we've given a lot of rapid recommendations already, but it is time for our rapid recommendations round for all things related to freedom, systems, automation, all the good things that are going to get us one step closer to achieving that bliss that we had just talked about. So I'm going to give you one topic at a time. You're going to give our listeners something to inspire them and go check out when the show is over. So the first topic is one book that you would recommend.
Inspirational Presence.
And
it's written by, let me look at it, Jeff Evans. I just read it, and it basically proves what I've been doing all these years. This gentleman did all the scientific research to determine how the effect a leader has and his or her presence has on the performance in an organization.
Awesome. And just like everything else we talk about, like we mentioned, this will be in our show notes, paulmaskill.com. You can head on over there and see all the things that we're talking about. It's all linked up so you don't have to remember anything. What about one quote that you kind of live by, inspires you to keep doing what you're doing?
Years ago, when I was a young engineer, I had the opportunity to work in Ford Motor Company with a gentleman named Edwards Deming, Dr. Deming, as he was known. Most people today don't know him. He had as much impact on the world as Einstein, but most people don't know him. And I was asking him, how do you measure this? How do you measure this emotional impact? How do you? And he finally looked at me and he was frustrated with me. And he said, Mr. Dial, when you grow up and mature, you're going to come to realize that most of the things that are most important for business performance, quality, safety, product, otherwise, cannot be quantified. And that stuck with me. And most business people don't want to talk about anything you can't, if you can't measure it, you can't measure management. But most of the things that affect the performance in your organization, you cannot quantify. You can't count them, you can't see them, you can't observe them. They're going on within the people and amongst the people.
That is so true. And I think it really goes back to kind of building those leaders, building a culture within your organization. A lot of things you do, you don't quantify right away, but you see the long-term value that you're building. Unfortunately, if you say, hey, I want to take these guys out to dinner because it's goodwill and I really want to build that relationship, they say, well, if you're going to spend $500 on dinner, what is your return on that $500? And if you can't prove it, they're like, well, that's not really good money well spent. So that Correct. Is very good insight. And that's really what we believe in here as well, is really building that culture and brand with your employees, your customers, your potential customers, by doing things, like that as far as building that culture. So great quote there. What about one tool that you use on a regular basis that you couldn't live without?
It's the ability to manage your interpretations of what are going on in the world. So most people react to and respond to circumstances. A quick example, somebody cuts you off while you're driving. Most people react to that and interpret that as that guy's rude, insensitive, she's a you-know-what, and they get angry. The tool that I often teach leaders is, how do you choose the interpretation you give to any circumstance? And how do you choose one that best serves you, best serves your people, best serves your company? Because the reality is, we make it all up. It really didn't happen. I'll have many of them say, but that's living in a world of make-believe. And I'll say, we all live in a world of make-believe. We make it all up. That's what human beings do. The world we experience is the one we choose to interpret. So learn how to interpret your circumstances, events in your lives in a manner where they best serve you. Excellent.
Very good insight there. What about one podcast that you listen to on a regular basis?
It's the Business Owners. I just did it. I'm sorry. I had it here. I threw my note away. I'm sorry. Business Leadership Series by the artist. And I like it because it's sort of an artistic approach to leadership. And I believe leadership is as much an art as a science. So again, it's a Business Leadership Series by the artist.
Awesome. We'll definitely link that up as well. And I think that quote that you just said there, it really is all about leadership when building that business. What about one community that you like to hang out in, whether it's online, in person? Where do your people hang out?
I would say there's a group in Austin called the Spirituality in the Workplace group. And it's more about the spirit, bringing spirit. I'm not talking necessarily religion, but that there is a spiritual component to business. And I enjoy working with these people because they sort of re-energize me, because I'm deep down, I'm a very practical person. I'm an engineer. But these people sort of regenerate that other side of me, and I'll constantly remind me that, there's a whole spiritual part to this thing we call business and performance.
Excellent. What about one parting piece of advice for any business owner out there who is stuck, burned out, or just trying to get over the hump?
Find yourself a coach. And that doesn't necessarily mean me. It means go find someone who has experience helping folks get out of issues like that. And what you want to look for is someone who's very provocative, who's going to challenge you, who's going to tell you the truth, and who understands how to create performance, and has a track record of creating performance. Most people hear coaching, they hear therapy or consultation or something. No, it's all about business results. So you want a coach who can look you in the eye and say, I can help you produce the results you want. I can help you overcome whatever's thwarting this commitment you have, this challenge you have.
Well said. And you're not the only one of the guests that have been on the show that really, advocate for that. Find a coach, find a mentor, somebody that's been where you want to be, somebody that you want to learn from, somebody that you want to spend time with, and learn from them. You can get to where you want to go much quicker instead of trying to figure it out all on your own. Sometimes it's too late by then.
The CEO of Home Depot has said many times he doesn't believe anyone will reach their potential without a coach, and that's whether they're in business or athletics or the arts.
Well said. Cort Dial, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to impart some of your knowledge, wisdom, and enthusiasm to our community. Hopefully this helps everyone out there get one step closer to achieving ultimate freedom in their business and in life. Before we sign off, where can our listeners go to keep in touch with you?
I made up a landing page on my website, so it's very simple. Just go to cortdial.com/business owners freedom forum, all one word. And Cort is C-O-R-T, not C-O-U-R-T.
Awesome. Cort, thank you so much. We'll definitely link that up. His website is Cort Dial, CortDial.com. If you want to hang out with him on social media, that's basically his handle everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. Not too many Cort Dials out there. CortDial. Cort, thank you so much again for spending time with us. Really appreciate your insights, and really appreciate obviously all the experience you've had, and be willing to share that with others. So thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome, Paul. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir. Everybody else out there, stay tuned for next week's episode as we dive into another fantastic interview with Patrick Galvin from the Galvanizing Group. And if you like what you're hearing, or you don't like what you're hearing and you want to give us some feedback, let us know. Head on over to iTunes. Quick little rating and review will really help us make the show even better for you, and really make sure you're getting everything out of it. Don't forget, lastly, you can join our free Facebook group at bizfreedomformula.com. If you just type that in, that will then forward you on. Technology is amazing. It'll forward you on to Facebook, right into our group, where you can continue the conversation with like-minded entrepreneurs who are putting the plans in place to work less, make more, while increasing the value of their business and achieving that ultimate freedom. So until next time, keep rocking, trust the process, and talk to you guys soon.